Hello, I'm Andrew Hoefling. Today we're going to be going over Intro to Xamarin. By the end of this class, you should be able to deploy your own iOS or Android app using Visual Studio or Android. A little bit about me. I'm a mobile app developer. I love working in open source, including Xamarin plugins. I've worked alongside several large enterprise-level projects from web to mobile. You'll find me on Twitter talking about DevOps and different ways to simplify the developer life, including mobile DevOps. And I run my own business doing C# consulting. Here I work for Search Consulting, and my two businesses are Hoefling Software and Roxam. All right, so let's talk about mobile apps. Currently, our traditional mobile app is built in this three-tier siloed approach if we want to make it cross-platform. So you have the iOS app, the Android app, and the Windows app. This ends up being three separate projects, code bases, and ends up costing 3 times as much because of all the maintenance that you have to have with it. So we want to get away from that. We want to have one code base because we're really making the same app 3 times. Why don't we just make the app one time and then deploy it to, or build it out to the 3 different native devices? So that's what Xamarin is going to do. We have one shared code base written in C# in Xamarin, and then it builds it out to an iOS, an Android, or a Windows. How does it actually work? So you're writing all your code in a mix of C# and XAML, and in our example here, we have a button control, and that gets brought down to the next layer into the Xamarin platform for, let's say, Windows or Android or iOS, as our diagram shows here. And once we're in those button renderers, it knows how to transpile it down to native, C#, Java, or Objective-C. So all of our code actually does end up becoming native code at the end of the day, even though we're working with it in a C# and XAML framework. So Xamarin utilizes a code sharing framework here. And in our case here, we're talking about Xamarin.Forms as opposed to Xamarin Native. So the diagram here shows out all of our code sharing for the UI code. So our iOS or Android and Windows has the same exact UI code. We're not writing different views for those. And then our shared app logic, again, we're writing the exact same shared app logic, and that gets compiled down. So what's happening here is we have one code base, we have less maintenance, it's more cost effective to the business, and it also makes it a lot easier on the developers, because if you get a bug in iOS that you might not see in the Android app in the three-tiered siloed approach, you're running into really a maintenance nightmare. Here, we have the exact same code across the board. You really have about 80% code sharing. There are some device implementations that you will run into that you might do iOS. And this part, all of your code is going to be the same code and shared across the board. So most of this talk is going to be a live coding demo. So what do you need to get started if you want to follow along? You're going to need Visual Studio 2017. As of right now, I have found issues if I am not using the preview build for what we're going to be talking about. So try and get the preview build. And when you install it with the Xamarin packages and get the Xamarin Live Player. You might need to get the Xamarin Live Player from TestFlight or Hockey App to get the latest Live Player build, and I'll add some links into the show notes here. And this should work on your iOS or Android device. And just to note, we're not deploying the APKs or the IPAs. We're using the Xamarin Live Players to get up and running Xamarin as quickly as possible. If you do want to deploy an IPA, for example, to your iOS device, you're actually going to need a Mac. But I'm working on a Windows and deploying to an iPhone using the Xamarin Live Player, so we can do some rapid development. All right, let's open up Visual Studio and get started. I'm going to start off with showing you a case study that I put together about Xamarin.Forms. The most common question that I get asked is Xamarin really native? I don't believe it. Why isn't it just a web view? So we're going to run this project here, and this is using a special implementation of Xamarin.Forms called UI. And one of the reasons why I like UI so much is it really demonstrates what Xamarin is doing because we can look at source code of a website. So this is a small Xamarin.Forms app that I built in UI, and we got text at the top, we got a little entry, we got a date picker here. I can come over here and change my date. We got some switches, and we got a button that's going to display a little alert here. And we're in a website here, so let's go and take a look at what the code is doing. So if I inspect on our button here, looking at our code here, we know it's a button. That's what it says right there. This is HTML. So looking back at our code here, let's take a look at what our Xamarin code looks like. If you've never seen Xamarin code before, this is our XAML page. This is our view. All of this is what we would do for our mobile project. So let's take a look at, we got our labels, our entries, our date pickers, stack layout to display the different switches, button. All this is Xamarin code. Then we got our Xamarin code behind here. We're just displaying an alert when that button's clicked. So all of this is really Xamarin code. And the point of this case study is just to prove how stuff gets compiled down to native. And I like using this because we can view it as a website. So let's take a look at this code inside of a Xamarin app now that's deploying to a phone, let's say. All right. Now we have the demo app opened up, which is just a demonstration from the UI case study I just showed you, but now it's in Xamarin.Forms. So we have our Xamarin.Forms project here with our Android, our iOS, our UWP, and our shared code. So I want to show you a little bit about the Xamarin Live Player. So I got my iOS screen being mirrored up here to show you it is. So you come up to Tools, and you go to Xamarin Live Player, and you click on Manage Devices. And on your device where it says Pair Again, I'm going to click that. And now I can come up and scan that code, and it's going to show connected to Visual Studio. A couple things to note with this: you need to be on the same Wi-Fi network as the computer. So both the device and the machine have to be on the same Wi-Fi network, or this is not going to work. I called my phone Recon, so we see Recon Player is showing up here at the deployment options here. So if I click the play button, we got our app. So we got saying welcome to Xamarin Intro class, and I'm going to click the more complex page. This looks pretty familiar. This was the exact same XAML that we just used in the UI.Forms project. We got an entry. I can start typing in some text there. We got a date picker. We got some switches, and we got a button we can click. So it's the exact same code. So now let's go in and let's stop this from running. Let's build our first Xamarin app together, and we'll go over a little bit more of the code once we're in there. Now we have our demo app opened up, and this is what we're going to use to build our very own Xamarin.Forms app that you can follow along at home. And let's just deploy it, make sure that everything is working with the basic Hello World app. And all right, we're displaying some text. That's good. Let's stop it, and let's go through the Xamarin.Forms app structure. So we have 3 projects in here: an Android project, and an iOS project, and our shared code project, which is the one at the top here. We're only targeting iOS and Android for this particular project. If you had other platform-specific implementations, you would have those projects here as well. So let's start at the shared code project and talk about the 2 files that come in here, XAML and a main page. The app XAML is required for every Xamarin.Forms project. This is your entry point. So there's the app XAML CS, which is the code behind for the app XAML. And here we have our main page, which we then create our, in our case here, our new demo app.main page and set equal to that. So this is taking our view of main page and adding it in to the actual main page of the Xamarin app. So if we look at some of our code for that, under main page, we have a simple label displaying some text and some positioning for vertically and horizontally centering the label on the screen. And as far as the code behind for it, there's really not a lot going on with it. We'll get more to this a little bit later. Let's take a look at our Android project. So the entry point for our Android project is going to be in the main activity. Main activity, see, we'll do some initialization of the Xamarin.Forms on line 22 here, and then on the next line, we're going to load our application and plug in the new app. If I go to definition on that, you'll notice we're back in our shared code area where we initialize the main page. So let's take a look at our iOS code. So our iOS specific code here starts in the app delegate. And again, we initialize our Xamarin.Forms, and then we load our application with the app. Very similar. And we come back here to our shared code. Okay, so let's start building our app. I'm going to come back over here and let's go over some of the basics of the Xamarin XAML. Before we get started, though, if you've worked in WPF or other XAML languages or implementations, things might be a little bit different. For example, like the biggest difference is in WPF XAML, you have a stack panel, and Xamarin, you have a stack layout. So some things might be different. But the principles still remain the same. Everything must be inside of a container. So in our case here, we could display a label on the screen. But if I want to start adding more properties, I should put everything inside of a stack layout. So let's create our stack layout. All right, so now I got our stack layout and our labels inside of it, and let's run it. Well, I don't like how that looks at all. Our text is all the way at the top. So because our vertical options and horizontal options was just on the label, it's really not doing a whole lot of good for us where it is now. So let's put it at the root container here. So we'll say our vertical options are center, and our horizontal options are center. Let's remove these properties here, and let's run it again. All right, cool. So everything looks the same. That's great. So let's stop the app. Let's add a button in. So it's just a button, and let's give it some text. Our text for that button might be me. All right. So now I could save it and run it, and now I got a button here, and clicking it does nothing. Well, we can add an event to that. So let's add an event to that. We'll use the IntelliSense there to auto create our event, which it didn't do for us. Try that one more time. There we go. Now we have the command, the event here in our code behind. Let's make an alert display for when someone clicks that button. So we have a method here called display alert, and I'm just going to title it alert and say this is an alert, and let the user click OK. One thing to note about this is a task, so we need to await it, and we need to make our method say async. So what's going to happen when the code executes here is it's going to come here, it's going to wait for user feedback, and then it's going to continue. So if you have a particular logic you want to execute, if the user selects yes or no, you can easily do that all in the same method. So let's run this app and see what happens. So now we got a button, and I'm going to click the click me, and now an alert pops up, and I'll just hit OK. So cool. Now we know how to create a button. All right, so let's go back to our page, and let's add a border to that button. Let's make it black, and let's make it 1. I want the button to be a little bit more pronounced on the screen. I'm not a big fan of how they display by default on iOS. So that's a lot clearer that is a button, and I can still click it. All right, cool. Well, now that we got a couple basic controls on the screen, I want to add a toolbar. So let's start off by adding a title to our page, and we'll call this page the basic page. All right. If I run this, nothing's going to change, but we need this for later. So the app just remains the same. I'm going to stop the app. Let's go over to our entry point in the app XAML CS. There's something called the navigation page. So if I create a navigation page, I can then plug in any content page to that navigation page, and now I'm going to have the toolbar displaying at the top of my app. So if I run my app, now we have the basic page title at the top here, and everything that we want is there. That's very cool. But now that I got my basic toolbar at the top, I want to add something to it. So let's add a toolbar item. So I'm going to go and add content page toolbar items. But this is weird because now I have my content just sitting out here. So the way that I like to structure my XAML for every content page is I'll do a content page .content, and this is really the parent container of where all of your content is. So I'm going to put all my content into that. Tab it over. So now everything is organized very cleanly. So inside, we can easily add our toolbar item now. So inside of our toolbar items, I'm going to add a new toolbar. And let's give it a name. I'm going to call it alert. And I'm going to say when it's clicked, it's going to do the button clicked event that we already created. Okay. So let's run our app. And now we have an alert text at the top here, and I can go and click that, and the alert pops up. The same logic will happen if I click the click me. Cool. So now we've created a very simple button inside of our toolbar. Now what we're going to do is let's talk about how we can reduce some of the noise in our XAML. We have some properties that are being set here, and I like my XAML to be a little bit cleaner than what we're seeing here. So let's talk about styles. We can add another type of section to our content page here called resources. And inside our resources, we have a resource dictionary, and this is where all your styles are going to be. And I always recommend if you're not using something like ReSharper, don't trust the IntelliSense here. It is, in fact, style. We're going to specify a target type. Let's start with our stack layout. And now once I've created my style, your IntelliSense should start working again. So we're going to use a setter. And our property is going to match the property for our stack layout. So we'll say vertical options. And I want to set that value to center. I want to do the same thing for the horizontal option. So we'll say horizontal options, value, center. All right, so now I can delete this code here, and it will automatically pull the style that we have there. So if we run our app, everything should still be centered. Cool, everything's still centered. That's great. Let's add another style for the button. I don't like how I have the border color and border width in there, so let's do that. So we'll say style, target type, and we're going to specify it for our button. Say setter, property is border color, and we said we wanted a black border. And we'll do the same thing for the border width, so property, border width, and the value equals 1. Alright, so now I can remove these additional properties here and clean up our XAML a little bit. So let's save that, and we'll run it. Cool, nothing's changed on our app. Our styles are there. One thing to note with the styles is the way we're defining our styles here is just for this page. So this is a page-specific styles. You can make global styles as well. So now that we have created a very simple page, let's add a new page. So let's go over to our Solution Explorer. And I want to create a list view page. Because in mobile, we do almost everything in lists. So let's start with new items. I'm going to come down to Xamarin.Forms, and I have a content page. When you're selecting your content page, you pretty much want to make sure you're doing it in XAML. XAML is kind of the gold standard. You can write your content pages in C#, but for our talks today, we're just focusing on creating XAML pages. So we're going to call this a list page because we're going to be demonstrating a list view renderer. Okay, so we now have our list page created. It has stubbed out everything for us. This is good. So now let's go back over to our main page and let's set up a navigation path to it. So I'm going to just copy the method that we already have here, and we're going to change it around slightly. So instead of button clicked, I'm going to say navigate to list page. And instead of displaying an alert, what we're going to do is we're going to use the navigation object, and we're going to push a new page onto our view stack. And the way we can do that is just new, and our page is called list page. And it's as simple as that. So now I'm going to copy this and update our main page XAML because that button referenced the button click event, and now I want to reference the navigate to list page event. So let's save all of that and let's run our app. Everything looks the same here, but I want to click me. Now we're on a new page. We get our back button that says basic page. We can go back and forth. We get all that for free. It's super cool. All right, so now that we got our events all wired up, let's add some content to that page. So let's go over to our list page. Right now there is a stack layout in there and a label. I want to get rid of this label, and we're going to create a list view. So it's just as simple as list view. And we're going to create an item source property. So the item source property is for all of the items you want to have in your list view. So this ends up being, an IEnumerable at the end of the day. So let's do binding, and I'm just going to call it data. And then inside of the list view, I need to display our data template of how we want the data to render. So we'll do list view dot item template. And the item template is a data template, so we'll have to specify our data template inside of it. And inside our data template, we're going to have a view cell. And then inside of that, we'll have a view cell view, and we could render a label. And I'm going to bind our label out to itself. Okay. So let's go over to our code behind and add in our binding context. We'll head over to our list page, not our main page. Okay, so there is something called a binding context on every single view. And the binding context is where you're going to instantiate your view model. In our case here, we're keeping a very simple demo, so I'm just going to use an anonymous object. And we'll say new. We want to specify data, and that's going to be an array. and we'll say foo, bar, and Xamarin. Let's put a semicolon at the end. Alright, so now we have added a binding context. We specified our data object. Let's go take a look at our XAML. When we specify the syntax of the curly brace, binding, property, and curly brace, that's pulling some object off of our binding context. So in our case here, we're specifying data. Inside of our list view, it's going to grab the properties off of that array. In our case here, it's string, so we're binding to itself using the. We had our app. I'll click me, and now we have a list view. I can click these items, and we can style it further if we want, but for the purpose of our demo, we're not doing any additional styling. So that's how we create a simple app with several buttons, a list view, and so forth. So you should have enough information now to create your own app, get it deploying to your device, and playing around with some of the things inside of Xamarin, navigating between pages, alerts, and so forth. So let's go back to our slide deck. So all the code that we've gone through today is going to be up on my GitHub repository, Intro to Xamarin, under Lesson 1. I'll include the link in the show notes. If you have questions, get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to talk through stuff. If you have problems, I'm available on Twitter, email, however you want to get a hold of me. We got a link to the slide deck here if you want to review anything in the video itself that you're watching. Thanks for listening, and I hope you got something out of this class.